My name is Chonhi. I'm a geneticist. I'm not sure how that sounds to you, but for me, it's more than just a profession. It's a way to understand how life is arranged, how it changes, how it can be improved, or maybe just fixed. I work in a research center that looks more like a labyrinth of glass and metal. Everything here shines, everything is sterile, and even the air feels artificial. But I like it. I feel I'm in the right place. My job is to study genomes, look for mutations that can cause diseases, and try to prevent them. It might sound boring, but in reality, it's like piecing together a puzzle where half the pieces are missing. Sometimes, I spend hours at the microscope, trying to figure out what went wrong in a DNA chain. Sometimes, I feel almost like a god, in the good sense. But most often, I just feel tired. Today was one of those days. I spent several hours in the lab, discussing the results of our latest experiment with my colleagues. We were talking about genes that might influence aging and how we could slow that process. But at some point, I realized I couldn't listen anymore. My thoughts wandered off somewhere, and I felt I needed some fresh air. Chonhi, are you okay? My colleague Miho asked, noticing I was distracted. Yeah, just tired, I replied, smiling. I'm going for a walk. Don't forget about the meeting tomorrow, he reminded me. I won't, I promised and left the lab. Outside, it was chilly. I pulled on a light jacket and headed to the old bridge not far from the center. It's my favorite spot. It's quiet, and you can think about your own stuff there. When I reached the bridge, the sun was already setting. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and I stopped to take in the view. But then I noticed something strange. A man stood at the other end of the bridge. He was wearing a white coat, and his figure shimmered slightly, like a mirage. I froze. It looked odd but also mesmerizing. Slowly, I walked toward him, and the closer I got, the clearer his figure became. He was tall, with dark hair and a tired but kind face. Hi, I said when I was close. He turned around and smiled. Hello, he replied. I didn't expect to see anyone here. Me neither, I admitted. My name is Chonhi. Yun, he introduced himself. I'm a doctor at the hospital across the street. He gestured toward the distance, and I turned to look. But there was no hospital there, just an empty lot and a few old buildings. A joker, I thought, but I kept it to myself. I'm a geneticist, I said instead. I work at the research center. That must be really interesting work, he noted. I guess, I replied and laughed. He turned toward the river flowing under the bridge, sighed, and said, I had a rough day today, he began. I had a patient, a boy, only 10 years old. He has a rare disease, and we still haven't found a way to help him. Sometimes I feel that no matter how much I study or how hard I work, it's never enough. I understand, I said. I have moments like that too. We work with genes, we try to find ways to prevent diseases, but sometimes it feels like we're only at the beginning of the journey. Though it's certainly not the same as working with children, that must be really tough. Why did you become a geneticist? He asked. I hesitated for a moment. When I was little, my grandmother died of cancer. I remember how she suffered and how helpless we all felt. That's when I decided I wanted to do everything possible to prevent that kind of suffering. That's noble, he said. I became a doctor because I wanted to help people too. But sometimes it feels like the world is too complicated to fix. Yes, I agreed. But we have to keep trying. It was already dark, and I realized it was time to go. I need to go, I said. I'm glad I met you, he replied. It was the best thing that happened to me today. I smiled, turned, and walked away. But when I looked back to see him one more time, he was gone. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The night was quiet, and the stars shone brightly in the sky. I sat there thinking about him, how he looked, how he smiled, how he spoke. For some reason, he stayed in my heart, even though I didn't really know who he was. Maybe I'm just tired, I thought, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. This morning, I woke up with the feeling that someone had pressed the time to live button. My mornings usually start with a routine: coffee, a quick breakfast, getting ready, then heading to the hospital. But today felt different. I decided to skip coffee and brewed tea instead, green tea with a light jasmine scent. For breakfast, I had a pudding I bought yesterday but never tried. It turned out to be sweet, almost too sweet, but it was nice. The sun was already up outside, promising a good day. I left home, deciding to take a different route, across the old bridge. Maybe I would see her again, that mysterious stranger I spoke with yesterday. The thought of her had been bothering me all night. Her smile, her words, her laughter, it all felt so real and yet somehow unbelievable. When I reached the bridge, she wasn't there. I stopped, looked around, but there was no one. Only a slight breeze rustled through the trees. I felt a twinge of disappointment, but I decided not to dwell on it. After all, I had a workday ahead, and it was time to move on. At the hospital, my colleague, Dr. Kim, greeted me. He immediately noticed that I looked somehow different. "Yoon, you look a bit mysterious today," he said, smiling. "What happened?" "Nothing special," I replied, but then I couldn't help telling him about meeting that girl. "Oh, so our gloomy bachelor finally has a chance to change his status." He laughed. I playfully punched him on the shoulder. "Time to work," I said, trying to keep a serious expression, but I could barely hide my own smile. My workday began with patient rounds. The first on the list was a boy who had been in the hospital for several weeks. His condition was serious, but he always tried to stay optimistic. When I entered his room, he was sitting on his bed, drawing. "How are you feeling?" I asked, coming up to him. "Okay, doctor," he answered, not looking up from his drawing. "What are you drawing?" I asked. He showed me his picture. It was a bridge, the same bridge where I'd met Chonhi the day before. I was surprised and praised his drawing. "You seem different today, doctor, in a good way," the boy remarked. I smiled and thanked him for noticing. Then I continued my rounds, but I couldn't get Chonhi out of my head. Her image, her voice, her words kept circling in my mind like a catchy melody. In the evening, on my way home, I took the bridge route again. I stood there for almost an hour, hoping she would appear. But she never did. Only silence and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the river. At home, I had dinner, took a shower, and went to bed. But before falling asleep, I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking about her, who she was, where she came from, and why her image had so deeply touched my heart. My workday began, as usual, with a cup of coffee and my computer monitor glowing brighter than the sun outside. I sat at my desk, analyzing data from our latest experiment. Numbers, graphs, DNA sequences, this had been my world for several years now. But today, I struggled to focus. My thoughts kept returning to him, to that stranger on the bridge. To Yoon. "Chonhi, you're off in the clouds again," came a voice nearby. I turned and saw my friend Mina. She settled into the chair next to mine, holding a cup of cappuccino. "No, I'm just tired," I said, though I knew it wasn't entirely true. "Sure," Mina smiled. "It's all because of that guy from the bridge, right? Have you seen him again?" "No," I admitted. "But I really wish I could." "So why don't you track him down?" she suggested. "You know his name, you know where he works. In our time, it's a piece of cake." I thought about that for a moment. The idea of finding him on social media or through acquaintances was tempting. But what if he didn't want to see me? Or worse, what if he was married? "That's silly," I finally said. "Imagine me walking up to him and saying, 'Good evening, you really got under my skin, so I wanted to see you again." That sounds like a scene from a cheesy rom-com. Mina laughed. "Well, maybe you're right. Who knows, maybe he'll find you first." "If we meet again, then it's meant to be," I said, trying to convince myself. "If not, then it's not fate." Mina shrugged and went back to her desk. I decided to go have lunch at the cafe on the first floor, hoping a change of scenery would help me clear my head. The cafe was cozy, with soft lighting and quiet music. I ordered a salad and tea, took a seat by the window, and tried to focus on my meal. But I couldn't stop thinking about Yun. What if I really did try to find him? After all, it's the 21st century, and everyone has a social media profile. I knew his name, knew he was a doctor. But no. I decided to brush those thoughts aside. If we were meant to meet again, we would. After lunch, I went back to the lab. The day passed quickly, and by evening I felt the need for a walk. I decided to stop by the bakery across the street. To get there, I had to cross the bridge. As I approached the bridge, the sun was already setting. The sky was awash in orange and pink, and I paused to admire the view. But then I heard someone call my name. "Chonhi?" I turned around. And there he was, Yun, standing on the bridge, looking at me. His face was lit by the last rays of the sun, and he was smiling. "It's really you," he said. My heart began to beat faster. "Yes, it's me," I replied, smiling back. We stood facing each other, and in that moment, everything around us seemed to freeze. We stood facing each other like two actors frozen on stage before the climax. The bridge was empty, only a gentle wind rustled the leaves, and the river beneath flowed slowly, as though it too were waiting. Yun broke the silence first. "I've been coming here every day," he said softly, though his voice trembled a little. "Ever since we met. But you were never here." "Me too," I admitted, feeling my heart pound. "I thought it was just a coincidence. That you simply disappeared." He smiled, and I saw something warm in his eyes, yet also a hint of worry. "I'm so glad to see you," he said. We walked over to the railing of the bridge, leaned on it, and looked at the river. The water reflected the last rays of sunset, and everything around us felt peaceful. But inside, I was a whirlwind of emotion. "I kept thinking about you too," I said, not daring to look at him. "Every day." That's when I noticed a newspaper in his hand. It was folded, but I could see the date on the front page, 2018. "Is that your hobby?" I asked, pointing to the newspaper. "Reading old papers?" He looked at it, then at me, a slightly confused expression on his face. "This is today's paper," he said. I froze. "Today's? But it's 2025 now," I replied, feeling a strange thought spinning in my mind. Yun laughed. "You'd make a decent actress," he said. I almost believed you. But I wasn't joking. I took out my phone and showed him the screen, where the date 2025 glowed brightly. "Look," I said. "This isn't a joke." He took my phone, his eyes widening. This is impossible," he whispered. "In 2018 there was no pandemic, that ended in 2022, I began listing major events of that year." "Stop," he interrupted. "I don't know what you're talking about. For me, it's 2018. We stared at each other, each seeing the same confusion reflected back. "Maybe this is some kind of prank," he offered. "I wouldn't joke about this," I said. We decided to test it out. I asked for his phone number. He recited it, I dialed, but instead of ringing, I heard an automated voice saying, "This number is not in service." He tried to call me, but he got the same result. "What the hell?" he whispered, looking at his phone. A chill ran down my spine. This was all too strange to be real. But it was real. Yun, I started, but at that moment, he tried to touch my hand. And then something happened that I will never forget. His hand passed right through me, like through smoke. I felt a slight dizziness, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I was alone on the bridge. Yun was nowhere to be seen. Everything was silent, only the wind still whispering among the leaves. Yun stood on the bridge, staring at the spot where Chonhi had just been. His hand was still outstretched, but he felt only emptiness. "Chonhi?" He called, but there was no answer. He looked around, but there was no one there, just the old bridge, the river, and the sunset that was almost gone behind the horizon. He couldn't understand what had happened. His thoughts were muddled, his heart pounded so hard he could barely breathe. He tried to recall every detail of their conversation, every word, every glance, but it all seemed unreal, like a dream. Yun slowly walked home, his legs carrying him by instinct while his head spun with questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? And why? Why did she vanish? At home, he sat on his bed, staring at the wall. His mind raced with thoughts he couldn't stop. Maybe it was just a hallucination. He wondered. But she felt so real. He lay down, but sleep didn't come. All night, he thought about her, about Chonhi. About what she said, that she was from the future. I stood on the bridge, feeling as though the ground beneath my feet had lost its solidity. The wind blew against my face, but I barely noticed. My thoughts were tangled, racing through every possible explanation. Maybe it was a dream? A hallucination? Or something I simply couldn't explain? Yun disappeared. No, I disappeared. No, we both. I couldn't make sense of it. His hand had passed through me, like air. It was impossible. Illogical. Yet it happened. Slowly, I backed away from the railing, still feeling a bit dizzy. My feet carried me back to the clinic, even though I'd completely forgotten I was heading out for pastries. Bits of memories spun in my head, his smile, his words, the confusion on his face when he saw the date on my phone. Minus 2018, I whispered to myself. That's impossible. At the clinic, I gathered my things almost automatically, hardly noticing what I was doing. My colleagues said something, but I couldn't hear them. The world around me seemed drained of color, blurred. At home, I dropped my bag on the floor, changed clothes, and grabbed my laptop. My fingers trembled as I typed, Oncologists, City of Seoul, 2018. I scrolled through pages, lists, photos, but didn't find his name anywhere. Neither Yun nor his clinic. Could it be a prank after all? I thought, but immediately dismissed it. His eyes, his voice, his confusion, all of it felt too real. I decided that tomorrow I would go to the building he'd pointed to, the place he said he worked. Maybe I'd learn something there. I could hardly sleep that night. I tossed and turned, trying to piece together the puzzle in my mind. But it didn't fit. The next day, I woke up early, not even bothering with breakfast. I tied my hair up, threw on comfortable clothes, and left the house. The building Yun had indicated was near the bridge. It looked old, abandoned. A padlock hung on the door, and the windows were boarded up. I stood there, my heart pounding a little faster. Then I heard a voice. "Young lady, are you looking for something?" I turned and saw an elderly man sitting on a bench nearby. He was gazing at me curiously. "Yes," I said. "Do you know what this building used to be?" He thought for a moment, then nodded. "A clinic," he said. "But it went bankrupt and closed. 3 years ago, maybe more." 3 years ago? I repeated, feeling a tightness in my chest. "Yes," he confirmed. I thanked him and was about to leave when he added, "Everything you're looking for is in your heart." I didn't quite understand what he meant, but I smiled and nodded. I had no idea where to go next. My feet carried me through the streets until I ended up in a park. I sat on a bench, trying to gather my thoughts. What should I do now? I asked myself. Suddenly, I felt a strange sensation, like a gentle vibration inside me. I closed my eyes, trying to understand what it was, but it quickly passed. I'm just tired, I thought. I should go home. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just fatigue. Something had changed, something I couldn't explain. My workday began as it always did, morning rounds, chatting with colleagues, a cup of tea in the doctor's lounge. But today felt different. I couldn't stop thinking about Chonhi, her image, her voice, her words buzzing in my head like a persistent tune. I went into the lounge, made myself some tea, and sat down. I took out my phone and tried calling her number again. But just like before, I heard only an automated voice. This number is not in service. What the hell? I whispered, staring at the screen. At that moment, I heard commotion in the hallway, shouting, rushed footsteps, the sound of gurneys. I went out to see what was happening. What's going on? I asked, walking closer. Explosion in a lab, one of the nurses answered quickly. 2 people got hit by flying debris. I looked at one of the gurneys and froze. Lying there was Chonhi. This can't be, I whispered. But it was her. I couldn't possibly mistake her, her face, her hair. Everything. How is she? I asked, trying to remain calm. Shrapnel injuries, we don't know which organs are affected yet, the orderly said. But she's alive. I ran alongside the gurney, trying to learn more. The nurses explained that a generator had exploded in one of the labs, and flying debris had hit 2 women working there. She's going to be all right, right? I asked, feeling my heart pound even harder. We'll do everything we can, a nurse replied. I waited outside the operating room, unable to leave. My thoughts swirled, my heart pounded so fiercely I could hardly breathe. This can't be real, I thought. She's from the future. Or I'm from the past. Or... I couldn't make sense of it, but I knew one thing for sure, I had to see her again. She had to survive. I left the hospital and went back to the bridge, the place we'd last met. But of course, she wasn't there. Only the wind rustled the leaves, and the river flowed slowly, as if nothing had happened. I stood on the bridge, trying to piece everything together. My mind was in turmoil. Maybe she's in a coma? I thought. Or some borderline state? But that sounded too far-fetched. No, I told myself. It's something else. I decided to return to the hospital. I had to see her again, to make sure she was all right. When I came back, the surgery was still ongoing. I sat in the corridor and waited. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the operating room door opened, and the surgeon came out. How is she? I asked, jumping to my feet. She'll make it, he said. The injuries are serious, but not fatal. I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. Can I see her? I asked. Not yet, the surgeon replied. She needs time. I nodded and sat back down. Again, my thoughts drifted to what had happened. How did she get here? I wondered. And why now? Today was supposed to be my day off. I planned to spend it in peace and quiet, lying on the couch, watching a show, maybe even cooking something nice. But, as often happens, plans collapsed in an instant. The call came early in the morning. I was still in bed, savoring a rare moment of laziness, when my phone rang. It was my lab supervisor. Chonhi, can you cover a shift today? He asked. One of the lab technicians didn't come in. I sighed. So much for rest. All right, I'll be there, I answered, trying to hide the irritation in my voice. I got up, quickly got ready, and left the house. The day was sunny, which lifted my mood a bit. On the way, I stopped at a coffee shop and bought 2 coffees, one for myself, one for my friend Mina. Thoughts of Yun wouldn't leave me. Every time I passed the bridge, I couldn't help but look around, hoping to see him. But he was nowhere. When I arrived, Mina greeted me. She hugged me and thanks for the coffee, and we started talking about our coworker who was once again hungover and absent. She never changes, Mina said, shaking her head. Yeah, I agreed. But, weird things have been happening to me too. I told her about running into Yun on the bridge, about how he vanished, about how I tried to find him. Chonhi, you're just exhausted, Mina said. You need a vacation, get out of the city, unwind. Maybe you're right, I said, though I knew deep down that it wasn't just exhaustion. I started working, but Yun was still on my mind. Then I heard a strange crackling sound coming from the corner of the lab where the generator stood. Do you hear that? I asked Mina. She nodded, and we walked over to investigate. But at that moment, an explosion occurred. The blast threw me back toward the door. I felt a sharp pain, and then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I couldn't understand where I was. Everything around me was blurred, as if I were looking through fog. I heard voices, but couldn't make out what they were saying. Chonhi, can you hear me? Someone asked. I tried to answer, but my lips wouldn't move. She's losing consciousness, major blood loss, another voice said. We have to get her to the hospital right away. I felt myself being lifted onto a gurney. Everything around me was moving at incredible speed, bright lights, voices, hands touching me. Then, darkness again. The doctor came out of the room, looking serious. Yun, who had been waiting in the corridor, immediately knew the news wouldn't be good. She's in a coma, the doctor said, removing his mask. The explosion damaged vital organs. Her condition is stable right now, but extremely severe. We'll do everything we can, but I can't give any guarantees. Yun nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He thanked the doctor, though words felt hollow. They handed him sterile clothing, and he headed toward Chonhi's room. A nurse standing by the door said quietly, You can go in, but not for long. And please don't tell anyone I let you in. Thank you, Yun whispered, going inside. The room was silent except for the monitors softly beeping, tracking her condition. Chonhi lay in bed, her face pale, her body seeming so fragile. Yun came closer, his heart tightening with pain. He sat down, carefully taking her hand in his. You have to make it, he whispered, his voice shaking. You have no idea how important you are to me. You are my life. He sat there, unable to tear his eyes away. Memories flooded his mind, how they'd met, how she disappeared, how he searched for her. And now, when he'd finally found her, she was here, but so far away. 7 years passed. 7 long years that Yun spent by Chonhi's side. Every day, he came to her room, told her about his work, about his patients, about how the world had changed in that time. He read books to her, played music, sometimes just sat in silence, holding her hand. He never gave up. Even though doctors said her chances of ever waking up were slim, he believed. He believed that one day, she would open her eyes. And that day arrived. Yun was doing his rounds when he heard an announcement over the intercom, All doctors, report to room 307 immediately. His heart skipped a beat. Room 307, that was her room. He dropped everything and ran. When he entered, Chonhi was lying there with her eyes open. She was looking at the window, her gaze slightly unfocused, but she was conscious. Chonhi, Yun whispered, coming closer. She slowly turned her head, her eyes meeting his. Yun. Her voice was weak, but it sounded like music to him. Yes, it's me, he said, tears threatening to spill. Is this real? She asked, her voice trembling. Yes, he answered, carefully touching her hand. Touch me again, she asked quietly. Yun leaned over and kissed her. It was a gentle, tender kiss, but it held all his love, all his pain, all his hopes. Chonhi felt him, his scent, his warmth. It was real. Why did you disappear back then? She asked, her voice quiet but full of questions. Yun sat down beside her, still holding her hand. I think it happened because you were in a coma, he said. Because now it's 2025. You've been in a coma for 7 years. Chonhi closed her eyes, trying to process this. 7 years. She had lost 7 years of her life. I don't remember anything, she whispered. Only you. Only our bridge. Yun smiled, though sadness lingered in his eyes. You're here now. And that's all that matters. The days went by, and gradually, Chonhi regained her strength. Her body was weak, but her spirit was strong. Yun was with her every day, helping her recover. One day, as they sat together in her room, Chonhi asked, "What happens next?" Yun took her hand and looked into her eyes. "We start over," he said. "Together."